Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Shields, your favorite math teacher, back again with another video. This time we have a slightly new topic, although there's a bit of a twist to it. So let's take a look at solving quadratics by factoring. Now, technically, we've actually done factoring already, so that part isn't new, but there's a twist at the very end that we need to use in order to find the answers to these problems here. So I'm going to do a few examples with you. So let's go ahead and get started here with our example problem here. So if I have a quadratic equation like we did the last time, we used the quadratic formula basically to identify your A, B, and C, and then plugged it into the formula to get an answer. Well, here's a second method of being able to get your answer. So just like last time when we had to identify our A, B, and C, we can do the same thing again here. This time we're setting it up for factoring. So in this case, our A is going to be 1, our B is going to be 3, and our C is going to be -10. But instead of plugging it into a formula, we're going to go back to, if you remember, our big X here in order for factoring to take place. So we remember our A times C, and then it has to add up to give me B. So if I multiply A times C here, I would have a -10. But I know that whatever my answer is, those two numbers also have to add up to give me B. In this case, it's just a +3. Now I'm going to post for you a copy of, I think you guys remember this, our factor chart here. So if you remember, we're using our factor chart. Let me just fold this in half here so you can see this a little bit easier on the page. I need to go ahead and take a look. I have my A times C, which is -10. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my 10 here. And so here are my two choices. I have 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. Now keep in mind, the second criteria is that it must add up to give me a +3. So it looks like 5 and 2 are going to be my numbers. But keep in mind, it has to be a -10. So that means one of these has to be negative. So in this case, the one that's going to have to be negative is going to be that 2, because what, 5 plus -2 gives me a +3. And so just like we did with factoring, we'll have our two sets of parentheses here. And so we're going to have x plus 5 and then x minus 2. Okay, so this part of the process is actually something we've done before. And so the next thing we're going to do with this, there's a slight twist to it. And so here's that twist. We have to take our two factors here, x plus 5, and our other factor, x minus 2, and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to have x plus 5 equals 0, and then I'm going to have x minus 2 equals 0. And then I'm just going to solve. All right, and so once I solve for x here, I'm going to subtract 5. So I'm going to get x equals -5. And then over here, I'm going to add 2. And so I'm going to have x equals 2. All right, and so those are going to be my final answers here. So basically all you're doing is factoring, taking your two factors here and set them equal to 0. All right, let's do the same thing here for example 1 here on this problem here. So if I take a look, I'm going to go ahead again and put my big X here because X marks the spot here. So we're going to have A times C. Let's squeeze that in here. And then we're also going to have that plus B here underneath. So when I go ahead and do this here, I'm going to find two numbers that have to multiply to give me A times C, but add up to give me B. So we can go ahead and identify our A, B's, and C's here. So our A is going to be that imaginary 1. The B will be the 4. And then the C will be 3. Okay, so then we'll have a times c, aka 1 times 3, which is just positive 3 here. And then I'm going to have it add up to give me a positive 4. So the good thing about this is it's pretty clear what our two sets of numbers are going to be. So if I look at my factor chart here, my a times c is 3. So I'm going to go over here. And I only have two sets of numbers, 1 and 3. So that makes life pretty easy for us as far as factoring is concerned. So they have to add up to give me a positive 4. So I know these are going to both be positive. All right, and so our answer is going to be, or x plus 1, and then x plus 3 for our factors. But we're still not done. Just like we did in the previous example, we have to take them and set it equal to 0. So let me make my little t-chart here. So I'm going to have x plus 1 equals 0, and I'm going to have x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, and then once I go ahead and solve these, subtract 1, I'll have x equals negative 1. I'll subtract 3, and then I'll have x equals negative 3. And so I can go ahead and write my final answers over here. X equals, little squiggly line here, negative 3 and negative 1. Okay, and then I can just highlight here. Okay, let's take a look at example 3 here. All right, so once again, my ABCs, A equals the imaginary 1, B equals also an imaginary 1, and then my C equals negative 2. All right, we make our big little X chart here. So A times C at the top, but it has to add up to give me B. All right, so if I do that, A times C, I'm going to have 1 times negative 2. So that's going to give me a negative 2 at top, but it has to add up to give me a positive 1 here. So once again, it's pretty straightforward as far as what my set of numbers are going to be. So if I look at the 2 here, or that negative 2, I only have as my options 1 and 2. But something has to be negative in order to get a positive 1 here, and that's something that has to be negative is just going to be a negative 1. And then we'll have a positive 2 as our factors. Okay, so then we'll have x minus 1 and then x plus 2. And all we're going to do here is just go ahead, put our little t-chart, set them equal to 0, and then we'll be done here. So I think the process is actually pretty easy. As long as you feel comfortable with factoring, I don't think this is too difficult for you. So just adding 1 on both sides. So x equals 1 and x equals negative 2 once you're done subtracting it on both sides. And then you can just write it like so, as 1 or negative 2 and 1. Just put a little squiggly lines right next to it, make it look sort of like a bracket. All right, we'll do 2 more examples here, and we'll do all the odd ones on this page, and then we'll move on a little bit, okay? So if I take a look at number 5 here as an example, we do our ABCs first. So A equals 1, B equals negative 10, and C is going to equal 21 this time. We'll still do our big X here. So A times C. So when I do 1 times 21, I'm going to get 21. And then, of course, it has to add up to give me B. In this case, we have a negative 10. And so now I have to go ahead and take a look at my numbers on my factor chart here. So this time we're going to 21. And so my choices, I have either 1 and 21 or 3 and 7. Well, if I need to get a 10, chances are that 3 and 7 are probably the ones that I want to go ahead and choose from. Now, since it has to add up to give me negative 10, looks like both of these are going to be negative. So then we're going to have x minus 3 and then x minus 7 as our factors. Then we're going to go ahead and set them equal to 0. Now, for those of you who are pretty astute here, what's going on, once you set them equal to 0, you're basically just changing the sign here in order to get your final answer, right? So we know that x is going to equal 3, and now x will equal 7, okay? All I did was add the 3, and then add the 7, and then you get that sign change, okay? So that's just a little shortcut, kind of save you a little bit of time on your steps, okay? And then I'll just highlight that here. And one last example. All right, so number 7 here, our last one. So once again, we start with our ABCs. A equals 1, B equals 10, C equals 25. We have our big X chart here. So I'm gonna have A times C, and then we're gonna have our positive B here. Now, when we do A times C, we're gonna have 1 times 25, which is just 25, but it has to add up to give me 10 here. So let me get my factor chart here, which I will also post on Student View as well for you guys. All right, so it has to be, we go to 25 here, so it's either gonna be 1 and 25 or 5 and 5. And I think you guys can probably already guess it's gonna be 5 and 5. They have to be positive in order to get that positive 5 here. So we'll go ahead and do that. And so once we do that, we'll have as our factors x plus 5, and then also x plus 5. Okay, make our little T chart here. And as you can probably guess, once I set them equal to 0, the signs will change. So then I'm just gonna have x equals -5 here, and also x equals -5. So in other words, you're just subtracting your 5 here, okay? Now, since we have the same answer here, we don't actually have to write it twice. We can just do x equals little squiggly line here, -5, and our other little squiggly line here, -5. And I just had just enough space to squeeze that in here on the screen here. So that worked out pretty nice for us. So that's the end of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Ms. Watkins or myself during our respective office hours. I'll see you guys again in the next video. Bye.